Speak the words of Lorgar, and you shall live forever in the glory of chaos. Speak them not, and every one of you shall die today.
The treachery of the traitors to the throne would sink to the lowest depths of humanity's most heinous traits. Butchery, betrayal, and dishonor, the forefront of their crimes against their loyalist brethren. Yet one legion above all would be the fulcrum of the traitor war effort and the linchpin for untold heresies. The most zealous, duplicitous, and conniving of all fallen angels of death, whom would drag their flawed brethren into the depths of ruin. The 17th Legion of the Legiones Astartes, the Word Bearers. The Emperor of Mankind would create a vast army of a new breed of warriors to reclaim the disparate fragments of humanity across the stars. Each legion would be unique in its methods of waging war, accomplishing compliance, and conducting tactics and stratagems of war. The 17th Legion, known during the Wars of Unification as the Imperial Heralds, would be among the Imperium's most staunchly devoted subjects. A legion seen by its peers as fanatical, the 17th Legion would draft its recruits from the Emperor's defeated adversaries. Raised to acknowledge the crimes of their ancestors, the 17th would strive to attain forgiveness for their sins. A condemned legion, the Imperial Heralds would be a mirthless and dour assemblage of warriors. Solely driven by penance and shame, the 17th would seek no glory in battle and attain no plaudits for their deeds. Duty was the unifying bond of the legion, and ruin would be their trade. The only legion to be given a title during their founding, the path of the Imperial Heralds would be ordained before the blood of their foes had even slicked their blades. Harbingers of the Imperial truth, the 17th would decree a simple message to their foes: recant or perish. A lone warrior of the Legion would visit each bastion of the Warlords of Terra, adorned in a skull-visaged helmet, black armor, and mace of office that would one day become synonymous with the chaplains of the Astartes. Offering the Emperor's mercy, these champions of the Imperial truth would bear a heavy tally of losses to any enemy unwilling to comply with the Imperium's demands. Yet for every herald whom would be slain, his battle brothers clad in grey would bear fire and death to his killers. Waging a war not of blood and destruction, the 17th would fight with the insidious poison of belief and illuminating flame of truth. Scouring each conquered foe's repositories of knowledge, the Imperial Heralds would raid libraries, archives and databanks to purge all tomes of untruth. Destroying all idols of false worship and sundering shrines and temples devoted to pagan deities, the Imperial Heralds would brook no mercy for the transgression of superstition. Burning statues, books, and even heretics on pyres of flame, the 17th would purge all who defied the will of the Emperor without hesitation. Their zealous nature earning them a new title among their brother legions and the burgeoning Imperium hushed in secret: the Iconoclasts. Yet their fanaticism would only worsen with the Legion's eventual reunion with their Primarch, Lorgar Aurelian. The feudal world of Colchis would be rife with religion and superstition. A planet once bustling with technological proficiency, now little more than dust and tradition. War was an inevitable tide for every generation, yet with the end of each bloodletting, a time of peace would arise. Change would be rare, with the populace accepting their lot, yet with the arrival of a Primarch to its surface, Colchis would rapidly transform. The Primarch's gestation pod would land on the planet at a time when the ruling priesthood known as the Covenant would control the civilization's populace. Discovered by a band of priests of the Covenant, the Primarch would be raised by the scions of the Old Faith. Unknowingly worshipping the ruinous powers under a benevolent guise, the populace of Colchis would be damned to be pawns of chaos from the start. The young Primarch Lorgar would study the tomes and teachings of the Covenant, and with time become a devout preacher of the Old Faith. A gifted orator with a kind, charismatic way of communicating, it would not be long before the High Priest of the Covenant, Cor Phaeron, would adopt Lorgar as his mentor. With time, Lorgar's prominence within the Covenant would grow and stoke the jealousy and spite of its senior clerics. Cursed with visions of a mighty being clad in bronze armor, accompanied by a cyclopean giant at his side, visiting the planet of Colchis, Lorgar's visions would intensify with his maturation. Believing his visions to be the sign of a true god of humanity, Lorgar would preach the impending arrival of his prophesized figure. Creating dissent within the Covenant due to his beliefs, a new faction known as the Godsworn would burgeon under the teachings of Lorgar. Declared a heretic by the clerics of the Covenant, the Keepers of the Old Faith would attempt to arrest Lorgar. Torn apart by Lorgar's followers, the clerics would watch as their enforcers would be slain by the zealously rabid crowd. Enacting a holy war against the upstart Lorgar, the clerics would cause a planetary war of two opposing views. For 6 years, the two factions would battle, until Lorgar would lead his Godsworn to the Temple of the Covenant, known as the Cathedral of Illumination. Within the heart of the City of Grey Flowers, Lorgar would kill the monks within the temple and declare himself the new Archpriest of the Covenant. Under the advisements of Corpheron, the old ways would remain a form of worship alongside the visions of the prophesied deity. For soon, Lorgar promised their savior would visit them within a year of their victory, and they shall know him simply as the Emperor. 1 year after the ascension of Lorgar, the Emperor of Mankind would reunite with his long-lost son and descend upon the planet of Colchis. Accompanied by his gene-son of the 15th Legion, Magnus the Red, the Emperor would meet with Lorgar. The Primarch would fall to his knee, weeping at the feet of his prophesied Messiah. The planet would kneel with their Archpriest, and following the festivities of their reunion, the Emperor would command Lorgar to induct his finest warriors to be incorporated into the 17th Legion. Despite the Emperor's admonishments of his own divinity, he would task Lorgar with leading his legion to bring compliance to the galaxy, not under the banner of the Old Faith, nor his own godlike visage, but with the knowledge and teachings of the Imperial truth. Lorgar would prove a keen yet deluded herald of the Emperor's will, for despite the Urizen's devotion to his new cause, his methods would be heretical. Rituals such as scattering the ashes of dead worlds across the brows of his Astartes before battle, and the utilization of titles such as apostles among his ranks, would raise suspicion within the Legiones Astartes. The Legion would be slow to bring worlds into compliance in comparison to their brothers, for with every planet conquered, the 17th would differ with their re-education and indoctrination of the world's populace into the teachings of their creed. Spreading the Emperor's divine image across the stars, Lorgar would sow the seeds of future heresies without knowing the extent of his misguided actions. Warrior lodges, fraternal yet superstitious organizations, would grow within some of the Legiones Astartes ranks. Civilians of the Imperium would begin to pray to the Emperor as a living god, and chaplains now brandished the skull helms, blackened armor, and croziers, made in imitation of the Legion's founding principles. His now renamed Legion, the Word-Bearers, had fostered worlds which would serve any order made in the name of the Emperor and pay high tithes for his favor. Yet after a century of waging compliance in the name of the Great Crusade, the Emperor would rebuke his most zealous son on the world of Kur. Lorgar's example of religious piety and failure to embrace the Imperial truth would continue to frustrate the Emperor. An example had to be made to enable his wayward son to see the error of his ways and turn to the path of enlightenment that the Emperor had outlined. Accompanied by his stalwart and capable son, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, Rabute Guilliman, the Emperor would shame the Word-Bearers for their transgressions. Confronting Lorgar Aurelian at the city of Monarchia, the Emperor would demand that their idolatry in his name would cease. Monarchia was a parody of the ideals and values the Emperor most despised. The so-called perfect city of worship made in the name of the Emperor would be an affront to the virtues of the Imperial truth. The Ultramarines and their Primarch would bear witness to the shaming of the 17th Legion by the Master of Mankind. For they were the ideal of the Legiones Astartes, and alongside their Primarch displayed the Emperor's ideals of honor, wise leadership, and loyalty. exemplars of the potential of every one of the legions to follow, the Ultramarines would stand proud above their peers as the Emperor forced the Word-Bearers to kneel with the use of his psychic might. Monarchia would be burned to the ground by the Ultramarines and Legio Custodes as Lorgar watched in horror at the ashes of his once proud city now coating his legion's armor. The Word-Bearers had failed, and no other legion, no matter their methods nor vices, had ever been shamed in such an open display. The 17th would be scarred deeply, and resentment within their ranks and their Primarch would grow. Withdrawing from the Great Crusade, Lorgar would be racked with self-pity and loathing. Returning after a time as a much-changed legion, the Word-Bearers would be driven with relentless fury. Worlds burned where they were once conquered with honeyed words and diatribes. Possessed of a penitent wrath, the 17th would seemingly have heeded their rebuke from the Emperor, but in truth, their future depravity had begun to unfold. Weak and vulnerable to corruption, Lorgar Aurelian would be swayed by the advisements of his lieutenants, Cor Phaeron and Erebus. Both the first captain and first chaplain retained their devotion to the old faith and would whisper dark portents into the mind of the Urizen. Poisoned by his adoptive father's words, Lorgar would embark on a pilgrimage to seek answers from the gods that would accept his praise and adoration. Upon the fringes of known space, Lorgar and his chapter of Word-Bearers, the Serrated Sun, would traverse under the watchful eye of a detachment of 5 custodians assigned by the Emperor in the wake of Monarchia. For soon, Lorgar Aurelian would find beings demanding of his devotion. Arriving at the Cadia system, Lorgar would order his fleet to orbit the planet of Cadia within close proximity of the Eye of Terror. Meeting with the barbaric purple-eyed tribesmen of the planet, Lorgar would be met by a woman known as Ingefell. Turning on the custodian known as Vendatha and using his body to conduct a ritual, Ingefell would ascend to the form of a demon prince and reveal the circumstance of the birth of the Eye of Terror and the chaos entity known as Slaanesh. Warning Lorgar that humanity would suffer the same fate as the Eldar should they reject their surrender to the ruinous powers, the Primarch of the Word-Bearers would willingly accept the manipulations of chaos. For 4 decades thereafter, the Word-Bearers would serve the Imperium under the guise of loyalty, readying themselves for the day when they would turn on their allies and the Emperor with the opening gambit of the civil war for humanity's soul, the Horus Heresy. Horus Lupercal, Primarch of the 16th Legion, would be corrupted by the ruinous powers and begin his insane march to the throne world. The Word-Bearers had quietly culled the Loyalists within their ranks and planted traps to be sprung as the heresy gained momentum. For while Horus would be the champion of the ruinous powers, Lorgar would be their unseen architect of destruction. Assigning his first chaplain, Erebus, to further corrupt the War Master and mustering his legion's strength, the 17th would reveal their treachery openly with the deadly surprise attack of the Battle of Calth. Under the guise of fraternity and brotherhood, the Word-Bearers would meet the 13th Legion, the Ultramarines, within the Calth system. Seeing an opportunity to renew their bonds of brotherhood with the Legion they had dutifully yet reluctantly shamed, the Ultramarines would accept their kin with open arms. For their trust, the knife of betrayal would be struck in their backs. Destroying many starships and murdering the unarmored and unaware lords of Ultramar, the Word-Bearers would enact their long-harbored vengeance. Driven to burn Macragge in the same manner as had been done to Kerr, the Word-Bearers under the command of Cor Phaeron would enact a heavy toll to the Ultramarines. Destroying all 3 of Calth's sister planets, Cor Phaeron would cause untold destructions against the innocent populaces. Poisoning Calth's sun with radiation-rich metals and unstable substances, Calth's atmosphere would become a volatile, lifeless, and inhospitable husk. Despite the Ultramarines rallying and dealing a crippling blow to Cor Phaeron and his fleet, the Word-Bearers had conducted a fatal blow to the Loyalist war effort before it had even begun. The most numerically superior legion had been severely damaged, with its Primarch Ravute Guilliman and several of his senior officers coming close to perishing. Summoning a vast warp storm in their wake, the Ruin Storm, the Word-Bearers would further exacerbate travel and maneuverability to the already scattered Loyalist legions. Cutting off the Ultramarines from Holy Terror, the War Master's slow yet unhalting march to the Throne World would be assured. Yet despite their efforts, the Word-Bearers had played a dangerous game and incurred the wrath of the 13th Legion. Half their fleet lay in ruins, and many of their legion had been slain. Seeing his revenge against the Ultramarines as unsatisfied, Lorgar Aurelian would broker an alliance with the 12th Legion of the Legiones Astartes, the World Eaters. Alongside the Primarch of the 12th, Angron, Lorgar would enact the Shadow Crusade across the Ultramar system. For while the Ultramarines were a sizable force, against the fury of 2 legions, their might would be strained. Emboldened with his victory at Calth, Lorgar would push further into the Ultramar system. The 500 worlds would be bled by the relentless and savage assaults of the combined 12th and 17th Legions, further preventing the Ultramarines from confronting the vanguard of the traitor war effort, the Sons of Horus. 26 worlds would be destroyed in quick succession, yet Lorgar would observe the worsening of his brother Angron's health with the continual damage inflicted by his brain implant, the Butcher's Nails. Diverting their crusade to the World Eater homeworld of Nuceria, the 2 legions would seek a means to delay or prevent further damage incurred from the malicious implants from those whom had originally nailed them into Angron's skull. Finding no answers, the Word-Bearers and World Eaters would raze Nuceria to the ground and be confronted by the Ultramarines' Retribution fleet, commanded by Rabute Guilliman. Attempting to destroy the Word-Bearers' flagship, Fidelitas Lex, the Ultramarines would simultaneously deploy into the surface of Nuceria and board the World Eater flagship, Conqueror. Weakening the Fidelitas Lex in orbit, the Ultramarines led by their Primarch would destroy the Gloriana-class battleship. As the shell of the Fidelitas Lex crashed into the oceans of Nuceria, Guilliman and his Ultramarines would descend onto the planet and confront the traitor Primarchs. Dueling Lorgar, the 2 would strike a deadly blow, with Guilliman achieving an opportunity to end Lorgar's life. Yet with the intervention of Angron into the fray, Rabute Guilliman would duel the Primarch once more. Imbuing his brother with chance and plights to the ruinous powers, Lorgar would imbue Angron's fury and upon the bones of his former homeworld, achieve his apotheosis. Reborn as a demon prince of Khorne, Guilliman would see no choice but to retreat from Nuceria due to Lorgar's interference and Angron's ascension. The Shadow Crusade had ended, for now it was time for Lorgar and the Word-Bearers to return to the War Master's side. Emboldened with his seemingly divine favor of the ruinous powers, Lorgar would see an opportunity to usurp the War Master. Disgusted at his brother's futile refusal to submit fully to the thrall of Chaos, Lorgar would believe that without succumbing fully to their demands, the war effort would be doomed to fail. Following the Battle of Beta Garmon and Horus's wounding at the hands of the Primarch of the Space Wolves, Leman Russ, Lorgar would make his move. As the traitor Primarchs assembled at the world of Ulanor, readying to make their final push to Holy Terror, Lorgar would confront the War Master. Allying with the Primarch of the Emperor's Children, Fulgrim, Lorgar would brazenly enact his coup. Betrayed by his close advisor, Zardu Lyak, and Fulgrim, the War Master would be warned of Lorgar's ambitions. Brought to heel by the War Master, Lorgar would be beaten within an inch of his life. Banishing Lorgar from his sight, Horus would assimilate the Word-Bearers under the command of Zardu Lyak into the fold. Lorgar, once more disgraced, would proclaim that the Siege of Terror would fail, and for his weakness, never battle at the gates of the Imperial Palace. Yet Lorgar's words would be proven true, and with the death of Horus Lupercal at the hands of the Emperor of Mankind, the bearer of the Word would need to find a new crusade to wage. Retreating into the Immaterium, with the elements of his legion still loyal to his cause, Lorgar would not be seen again within the material realm. His weakness forever recorded in the annals of the Imperium's history for all to see, and his Word-Bearers now bereft of a vision or prophecy to follow. Yet with Lorgar's ascension to a demon prince of chaos undivided within the Immaterium, it is unknown as to the means the Urizen would accomplish his apotheosis. Yet in the eyes of his legion, his stature proves as vindication enough for their insane and depraved fall from grace. During their service of the Great Crusade, the The Word-Bearers would, alike to most legions, comprise of a variety of chapters. Largely unchanged in structure with the reunion of their Primarch, the 17th squads would consist of 20 Astartes and be painstakingly maintained at full strength. 5 squads would serve each legion company as 100 Astartes and specialize in a particular combat role. As few as 5 companies, or as many as 30, would be grouped together to form each chapter, ranging from 500 to 3,000 Astartes strong. Each chapter would bear a sigil based on the constellations of Colchis and be led by a captain of the legion. Examples of chapters such as the Serrated Suns, Weeping Hand, Ebony Serpent, and Graven Star would each earn valor for their legion and excel in their own expertise of war. Whilst the chapter of the Osseous Throne would deploy infantry in vast waves, the Quillborn chapter would excel in ship-to-ship boarding actions and naval battles. Conducting warfare with a flair for the dramatic, the Word-Bearers would incorporate elements of storytelling and fables into their most lauded victories and compliances. Specialists such as the Ashen Circle would descend from the heavens to deliver a decisive blow to the enemy, and for their valor be selected to ascend to the rank of chaplain. Leading bands of fanatical mortal soldiers into battle, the Word-Bearers would pioneer the zealous fury that would later be adopted by the Fraternus militia of the Imperium. Such mobs of infantry would overwhelm the Word-Bearers' foes before the hammer strike of the Legion would crush the remaining fragments of Defiance. Yet following the Legion's corruptions of the Horus Heresy, the Word-Bearers would be the only traitor Legion which would retain their command structure into the era Indomitus. Venerating their patron gods collectively, the Word-Bearers worship Chaos Undivided and show outright contempt for any who show favour to a singular deity of the ruinous pantheon. Now employing demons to act as shock troopers during battle, the 17th Legion continue to draft hordes of Chaos cultists to further bolster their ranks. Utilizing such pawns as cannon fodder, the Word-Bearers under the command of their Dark Apostles divine the best means to achieve victory. The Legion's heretical hymns and ritual prayers before battle, bolstering their faith in the powers of Chaos Undivided, and calling upon its malignant power to aid their cause. The command hierarchy among the Word-Bearers has remained a constant throughout its tumultuous history. Still revered by his sons, Lorgar Aurelian is the highest authority of the Legion. Seen to be favoured by the full extent of the forces of Chaos, Lorgar is a martyr to the beliefs and cause of the 17th Legion. Ranks within the Word-Bearers would seem to bear similarity to even Loyalist legions in its initial structure. Each chapter is led by a chapter master, who in turn commands the captains, who lead each company, who in turn guide the sergeants of each squadron. Yet unlike every legion of the Astartes, the Word-Bearers venerate their chaplains as the highest authority. Attached to each company with several chaplains working within each chapter, the spiritual leaders of the Legion would overrule the commands and decisions of even the most senior-ranking commanders. The High Chaplains of the Legion, revered above all save for the Primarch, under the tutelage of the first High Chaplain, Erebus, these individuals would see to the Legion's subjugation to the whims of their patron gods. Now regarded as Dark Apostles, the Chaplains of the Legion convene their Dark Council of Superiors to decide the fate and course of the Legion's actions across the stars. Each Dark Apostle mentors a first Acolyte to ascend to become a member of the Dark Council, promoted to the rank of Dark Apostle only in one of 3 circumstances. First, should the first Acolyte's mentor perish in battle. Second, should he be selected by the Dark Council to join their ranks on the demon world of Sikaris. Or third, the first Acolyte must murder his mentor and await appointment by the Dark Council. The Anointed are sealed within their Terminator-class armor shell and are enclosed within until he shall die in battle. Only 200 in number, these elite warriors often safeguard the first Acolytes in battle and prove their worth felling the most fearsome of enemies. Though within the Legion many specialist organizations exist to fulfill the will of the Dark Council. The Gal Vorbak, or Blessed Sons in their native Colchizian dialect, serve as the Legion's most deadly warriors. Survivors of the Serrated Suns chapter's venture into the Eye of Terror during the Horus Heresy, these demonically possessed Space Marines would transform into mutated beasts during combat. Resuming their human form after battle, the Galvorbak, though now small in number, are among the most deadly and feared warriors of the Legion. The Anunnaki, or in Colchis, Judges of Hell, would be deemed worthy of being interred within the chassis of a dreadnought and serve their Legion even in living death. Their battle fury and corruption by the powers of chaos, enabling them to one day ascend to transform into a hellbrute of the ruinous powers. During the Legion's service prior to the Horus Heresy, each member of the Wordbearers would adorn their armor with Colchizian prayers. The slate grey of their armor, uniform within the Legion, with only the chaplains of the Legion given the right to adorn their trim with gold filigree. Following the shaming of the Legion of Monarchia, the chaplains would repaint their armor black in remembrance of the ashes of their once proud city that stained the Legion's ceramite. With their continual corruption by the ruinous powers, the Wordbearers would eschew the grey of their Legion and adopt a deep bloody crimson red, etched with heretical runic texts. Known by the Loyalists as the Traitor's Red, the Wordbearers trimmed their armor with black and silver. Originally adopted by the Serrated Suns chapter, the Arterial Betrayer's Red would become infamous during the Battle of Calth and become widespread following the engagement. Blasphemous excerpts from the Primarch's tome, the Book of Lorgar, these parchments made of human skin, are worn proudly on their armor. The most accomplished warriors of the Legion bear the most scripture inscribed by the hands of their Dark Apostles and Chaos Sorcerer brethren. Each champion of the Legion enacts sermons during battle, and whilst bedecked in encyclopedias of blasphemy, weaken the Immaterium to enable demons to infiltrate the mortal realm. Their once proud emblem of a tome of knowledge, ablaze with the burning flame of the Imperial truth, now replaced with the Latros Sacrum. Upon their left shoulder plate, the stylized roaring horn demon's head represents their complete submission to the whims of the ruinous powers. Wreathed in unholy flame, the Latros Sacrum displays the Legion's total submission to the thrall of chaos and unwavering loyalty to the machinations of fell beings. Veterans of the Legion bind lesser demons to their will, with the aid of helmets adorned with geometric symbols to aid in their subjugation of the Neverborn. Yet should a demon of great power be bound to such veterans, they shall submit their souls to bind with the malevolent and powerful beings. Proliferating an extensive variety of banners throughout every battalion of the Legion, the Wordbearers hold aloft their debased symbols of their treachery and malevolent ideology. The Legion's armoured vehicles, alike to their armour, bear the scriptures and etchings of the Book of Lorgar, and stampede into battle with unabashed, zealous fury. With Lorgar's 10 millennia seclusion upon the demon world of Sakaris, the Wordbearers as a Legion have, unlike many of its contemporaries, retained a unified and unbroken structure. Now commanded by the Wordbearers' Dark Council, an assortment of Dark Apostles of the Legion dictate the objectives and whims of the 17th. Divided in purpose by its two most venerated and infamous leaders, Khor Pharon and Erebus, the faith of the Wordbearers, though split, is nevertheless enough to give purpose to its ranks. Waging wars of faith against the Imperium, the Wordbearers strive to bring human civilizations into the thrall of the ruinous powers. Whether 1 million or even 1 billion souls should perish, the Wordbearers shall not relent in their slaughter, should it bring even a single world into the service of chaos. Often competing with the Alpha Legion in bringing planets into the fold, the Wordbearers are often comprised of such large numbers of both Astartes and human cultists that few Imperial forces can stem the tide of their heresy. Though among the darkness, the Primarch of the Raven Guard, Corvus Corax, has been reported to harry and harass the Wordbearers should the occasion present itself, with even Lorgar Aurelian coming close to being slain by the claws of the Raven Lord. Yet the Wordbearers shall not relent in their continued corruption of the hearts and minds of humanity's vulnerable citizenry. For should a single idol of the Emperor, or cathedral made in his name, stand, the Wordbearers shall not cease their purge of his relics and ideals. For it is said that Lorgar Aurelian now stirs from his long meditations with the birth of the great rift across the galaxy. And after 10,000 years of bitter reflection, the Urizen is once more readying for war.
Faith is the soul of any army, be it vested in primitive religion or enlightened truth. It makes even the least soldier mighty. The craven is remade worthy, and through its balm and hardship may be endured. Faith ennobles all of the worlds the soldiers undertakes, be they so base or vile, and imports to them the golden spark of transcendent purpose.
This has been a tale of the great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. The Word-Bearers epitomize humanity's failure to abolish superstition in defense to truth, logic, and secularism. The downfall of the 17th would be orchestrated from its very start by malevolent and duplicitous beings, to which the Word-Bearers would willingly and gleefully embrace their depraved teachings. Yet in our next transmission of the Legiones Astartes, we shall elucidate the logical, stalwart defenders of humanity, the cold-reasoned Praetorians of terror, the Imperial Fists.